Hi everybody, this is Tara. I am the Garden Center Manager here at Alaska Mill and Feed, and today we're going to be talking about raspberry and strawberry care. I just want to tell you one more time, if you could please keep muted and then also your videos off. We are recording this so that everybody can get a link afterwards to watch it again if they'd like to. And then if you would like to ask questions, if you could put them in the chat. And if you can't hear me, if you could let me know if you need to turn the sound up. Looks like people are not having any problems. Great. Okay, good. At any point, if you need me to speak up or if there's a problem, just go ahead. May we please see Tara. Right now, we're not going to turn on the video, okay. So if you do have any questions besides wanting to see me, go ahead and put it in the chat and then I will answer them at the end of the presentation so that we can get through everything. And because I get easily distracted when questions pop up, so I'm just not going to look at them until the very end. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're talking about raspberries and strawberries today, and this is all information that I have gained by being a home gardener, doing a lot of research, and learning from my gardening mentors. So there might be some people who do things differently, which is totally okay. If you've got a neighbor who does not follow any of the guidelines that I'm going to put forth, then maybe you should see what they do and try that as well. So always experiment with your gardening. And here we go. Okay, so raspberries are brambles, and brambles are basically anything that are thorny and have like the big long canes. And it takes about 3 years to really develop a good raspberry patch. Raspberries have a perennial root system, so the roots come back every year, and the crown's also perennial, but the canes are biennials. They only live for 2 summers. And there's 2 types of raspberry canes, primo canes and flora canes. The first year cycle is when the primo canes will grow. So primo is first, so they're the first ones that come up. This growth is really mostly vegetative. So they're the green, fleshy ones that grow every year. The second year, the primo cane is now a flora cane. So flora, flower. So these canes produce flowers and fruit, and then they die back because they die after 2 years. And you can also tell the flora canes because they're going to be woody and brown. Because the canes come and go every couple of years, the roots are really important. So it's important to take care of the roots. And they are self-fertile, so you don't need 2 different varieties or multiple varieties, but some people do think that you get more berries if you have more than one. So it's definitely worth it to get a couple of different kinds and see if it increases your yields. And raspberries are aggregate fruits, and they're made up of little tiny drupelets, and not druplet, an actual drupe is a peach. So if you think about a whole bunch of little tiny peaches stuck together, that's basically what a raspberry is. And each of those contains a single seed, as everybody who has ever had raspberry jam knows. Raspberry flowers are self-pollinating, but they still need insects to pollinate them, and bees are the best pollinators. So if your raspberries are deformed, then it's really likely that you have poor pollination. So ways that you can increase pollination would be having more flowers around your raspberries. And these are some locally available raspberry varieties from the vendors that we receive our raspberries from. The main vendor is Tim Pritchett, and these are the ones that he carries. And so they're the specific varieties that I'm going to talk about. So there's Everbearing, and those are the ones that produce fruit on the flora canes the second year. There's the Boyne raspberry, which is medium to large red berries, and they have a really nice sweet raspberry flavor, like the raspberry flavor that you think of when you think of raspberries, but they aren't as tart as the Lathams. And the plants are pretty short, but they are very hardy to a zone 3. And most of Anchorage is a zone 4. Just outside is usually a zone 3. Canbies are large, bright red berries, and they have a really sweet taste, and they're not very tart. The canes they don't have very many thorns, and the raspberries are pretty good keepers, so they store well, and those are a zone 4. The Lathams are a pretty large red berry. That's a picture of Lathams on the screen. And they have a really traditional raspberry flavor. They're very, very hardy. They were developed in the early 1900s in Minnesota, I want to say, and they were brought to Alaska when the Matanuska colony was established. And they're zone 3. And then there's a new variety called the K81-6, and that was recently developed in Nova Scotia, I think just within the last 10 years. They have really large berries and good flavor, and they're a zone 4. And then we have autumn bearing varieties as well. So autumn bearing varieties, they pretty much everywhere but Alaska, they will give you 2 different kind of flushes of berries. So one earlier on in the summer and then one in the fall. And here we usually don't get quite as many berries. We treat them mostly like they're the summer bearing, and that way you'll get more berries all at once. And the 2 varieties that we carry are the Anne and the Honey Queen, and they're both yellow raspberries. And yellow raspberries are really just color mutations, and they're the same as red raspberries. You treat them exactly the same. Let's see. So the Anne has large yellow berries, and it's a really sweet tropical fruit flavor, kind of pineapple-y and apricot-y. And they don't have as many thorns as other varieties, and they're a zone 4. And then the Honey Queen, they're kind of medium yellow size, and they're very sweet, and they taste a lot like pineapple. And the canes tend to arch, and so they need to be supported and tied in a little bit more. And they're a little bit shade tolerant, and those are a zone 3. And the Anne raspberries are the ones that are in the picture. And I am distracted by a question. Somebody's just asked what their zone is. So you can go online and you can Google what your zone is and put in your zip code, and it will tell you. So when you plant raspberries, this is a big long slide, but we'll go through it slowly. When you're actually going to plant the plant that you buy from the nursery or from us here, you want to plant early spring or early June here. That's going to be the best time. And if you can do it on a cloudy day or a drizzly day, or just not when the sun's beating down, it's going to stress the plants out less. So try to do it when the weather is a little gray, but you want to choose a location that's going to be in full sun. Raspberries will grow in part shade, but they're not going to produce as much fruit. The ideal spot for raspberries has really good air circulations, but isn't too windy. They don't like to be cold and windy. They like very rich, well-drained soil. And if you need to improve your soil, you can mix a few inches of compost into the soil prior to planting. 3.5 cubic feet per 100 square feet is a good rate. Raspberries prefer acidic soil with a pH between 5.5 to 6.5, and depending on where you look that up, it varies slightly, but that's the general range. You don't want to plant them where tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants, and peppers and plants in that same family have grown, because those plants are also susceptible to verticillium wilt virus, and they can spread it to them, to the raspberries. So keep those in separate areas. When you're spacing your plants out, plant them every 2 to 3 feet. And if you're planting in multiple rows, then planting them 8 to 10 feet apart will make it more comfortable for you to harvest. And it'll also make sure that there is adequate airflow among the different bushes. And if you use a trellis system, you can grow them closer, but again, make sure that you're not reducing the airflow too much. You're going to dig a hole in the dirt about 2 feet in diameter and deep enough that you can plant it a few inches deeper than the plant is in the pot. So it's okay to cover up the crown by 2 or 3 inches. Make sure you soak the area very well, press down the soil around the plant, and then mulch with straw, bark, or a really thick layer of leaves. When you're watering raspberry plants, they need the equivalent of at least 1 to 2 inches of rain a week just when they're growing. So it's going to be the first half of the summer, and then 2 to 4 inches when they're producing berries. So water them regularly and don't let them dry out, but you want to aim the water at the base of the plants. Try to avoid watering the leaves and the fruit because this will help minimize disease. And a soaker hose makes this a lot easier. So you can buy soaker hoses, kind of wind them around your raspberry bushes, and it'll be much easier to water them without getting the leaves wet. You can grow raspberries in raised beds in containers. And if you can't amend your soil, if you don't have really nice, rich, fertile soil, then it's recommended that you use raised beds. The same basic soil guidelines do apply. You want well-draining soil, really rich soil, the same pH levels. They do have relatively deep root systems though, and so the raised beds should be about 2 feet high or taller if you can do that. And then if you're gonna do them in a container, a 20 to 30 gallon container works pretty well. And you wanna make sure that you keep them pruned so that they don't overrun their containers. This is a basic trellis design, and you can look it up. I put the link where I got the picture from below the picture. This is a pretty basic design. It's the T-bars and then there are wires that are connected to the crossbars. So it's a little tiny cage basically for the raspberries. And then you can tie in the canes to the sturdy wires if you need to. It's much easier to put a trellis in before you plant or when the plants are still very small. They're not necessary, but they can make harvesting easier. They keep the plants neater and they support tall plants. And you can grow raspberry plants up against a fence, but keep air circulation in mind. So one of the chain link fences is a really good idea. If you're growing them up against a wooden fence, then I would prune out certain leaves and areas to make sure that there's a lot of good airflow. Fertilizing raspberries. They're very heavy feeders, so they do benefit from being fertilized in the spring. I always recommend soil testing before you plant or make any amendments. It's going to save you money and possibly save your plants if you over fertilize them or give them things that they don't need. You can add bone meal and rock phosphate if your soil is low in phosphorus, and then green sand will help add potassium and trace minerals in. We have a down-to-earth acid mix that you can use. And I think that's a 463 NPK or thereabout. Or you can use a really lightly applied 83216 and that'll work too. You do want to avoid overdoing the nitrogen and then only fertilize in the spring. If you fertilize later on in the year, especially in the fall, it's going to encourage new growth to come up. But it won't be able to mature and harden off in time for winter. And so the plant's gonna be really susceptible to frost damage. And then every spring you can top dress by applying a shovelful of compost or rotted manure for every foot of row. And if you have mulch down, you're gonna wanna pull the mulch back. So if you have a whole bunch of straw down at the base of your raspberry plants, make sure you push that out of the way, put down the compost, and then put it back, or even put down new mulch. Pruning raspberries. So this is the way that I do it. I would look into different ways, but this is a good basic way to prune raspberries here in Alaska. So in early spring, you're going to want to prune back any damaged canes. So anything that got broken from heavy snowfall or anything that doesn't look like it's going to grow, go ahead and prune that back down to the ground. Wear gloves and long sleeves if necessary, and use clean and sharp cutting tools. And then in the summer, in the autumn, after the first killing frost, cut back the canes that have fruited. These are the second year canes and they're going to die anyway. So just go ahead and cut them back. The autumn bearing varieties, sometimes they will fruit on flora canes the first year, but they're only going to do a couple of berries at the very tops. So if you pay attention and the cane is green and there's only a couple of berries on it, don't cut that one back. You can cut back the top part where the berries have been, but don't cut back the entire part. Let's see, if you're pruning right after harvest, you can identify the canes that you want to remove by the remains of the receptacles. And so if you look at that smaller picture, the white part that's inside the raspberry that the raspberry is actually clinging to, that's called the receptacle. So if you've got those, you know you had berries, and so you can trim that part off. If you wait to prune until winter, then look for the brown canes with peeling bark and prune those. And you can wait and do all the pruning in early spring, but your plants might sustain some more damage from snow, so you might break more canes. And then friends and foes. So companion plants that like to grow with raspberries and can benefit them are chives and nasturtiums, leeks, onions, chamomile, marigolds, and yarrow. And they can help keep pests away, and the flowers will attract pollinators. Not good companion plants to have around them are potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, blueberries, basil, and strawberries. Some of the problems we see with raspberries are gray mold or botrytis. And you want to keep your plants thinned out and make sure there's adequate circulation. Avoid using too much nitrogen fertilizer, and then monitor plants. And if you find anything that has gray mold on it, remove it right away and don't put it in your compost pile, just dispose of it. There's a lot of spores in just one little berry covered in the gray mold, so you want to get that away from your plant as soon as possible. Verticillium wilt, don't plant near the potatoes, tomatoes, and eggplants, and then remove any dead or dying material that you see. And there's no real treatment for verticillium wilt, so you have to destroy your plants. And it's a good idea to destroy like your neighbor plants. Well, the plants neighboring the affected plant, don't go kill your neighbor's raspberry plants. You want to use bird netting to keep birds away if they're a problem, but if you pick your berries regularly, it'll also help. Some harvesting hints for raspberries. Once the berries are ripe, pick them at least twice a week. And then if you harvest them in the cool part of the morning after the dew has dried, it will help increase their shelf life. That is in a perfect world. Try to do it on a cool, dry day if you can. Pick them gently and then place the berries in one layer. A tray or a box lid works well, or we have the round red berry picking trays here too, and that will avoid crushing the berries. Keep freshly picked berries out of the sun and refrigerate them as soon as possible, and don't wash them until you're going to use them. In the winter time, so before winter, make sure you clean up all plant debris, the leaves, the canes, and the fallen berries, and prune your canes back. You don't really need to use extra mulch as long as your raspberry plant is hardy in your zone. So all the ones that we have up here should be good for you, and you shouldn't need to mulch them. You can if you want to. It shouldn't hurt, but you don't need to. And then enjoy eating the fruits of your labors. And okay. What do you consider early spring is a question that I just got. And so for me, early spring here in Alaska is really probably going to be late April when things start to melt and maybe the ground is starting to become workable, or early May. But it really depends on your area. And I'm going to go up a little bit. So zones. Yeah, for zones, go ahead, you can look up USDA zones and then put in your zip code and it will tell you. And then a question about pruning. I heard that it's good to leave the old canes through winter until spring since the plants use them for nutrients in the winter. I haven't heard that it's good for them for the nutrients, but it is definitely worth trying. If you've got 2 raspberry bushes, I would consider pruning one of them back after the first frost kill, and then keep the other one throughout the winter and see which one does better, and then that could be your new method. Tips for starting new patches, pretty much what I just went over, all of that planting. and spacing. You want to make sure that your plants are spaced out about 2 to 3 feet. And then it will take a couple of years for them to really start to establish. How do you store containers over winter? Containers of raspberries. So I will be going over how to store containers of strawberries, and it's going to be the same basic method. And I bought a house, inherited dozens and dozens of raspberry canes, lots of overgrowth. Do I just prune good canes out so others have more space? Yes, if you have a ton of raspberry bushes and you don't want that many, then just prune out everything that you don't want. How far away should you keep raspberries from strawberries, potatoes, etc.? I don't know exact footage that you should keep them away. I would do at least 10 to 15 feet, just so that you're not spreading diseases back and forth. And how to keep moose away from them. Nets work, and then in the summertime you can use like the plant skid and some of the moose deterrents like that, but I don't really know a good solution to that. They come and eat mine too. My berries last year had random black spots and didn't taste great. Does that sound like gray mold? Gray mold is usually like gray and fuzzy and pretty obvious. So that sounds like it might be some sort of fungal disease or virus, and I'm not sure what it is. But what you can do is you can contact the UAF Cooperative Extension, and I have their information at the end of the presentation, and they might be able to help you out better with it if you give them a description. Okay, we're going to move on to strawberries now, and at the end you are free to ask questions about raspberries if you come up with more raspberry questions. Okay, so this is the anatomy of a strawberry plant. You have the leaves, the flowers, the fruit, which pretty much everybody recognizes. The crown is the part that comes up out of the ground, and then there's the roots below. There's the runner, and then the runner leads to the new daughter plant. I got this image from The Places You'll Grow, and it's a like a homeschooling learning kind of website, and they have a really good lesson plan on strawberry plants if you're interested in that. And the link is on this slide. So there are a couple of different kinds of strawberries, and we're going to go over them. So there's June-bearing and Everbearing strawberries. June-bearing, which is really July in Alaska, so we should call them July-bearing. They set flower buds in late summer, so before July, and then they bear fruit for just a few weeks, July, and then they stop. The remainder of the season, they put all of their energy into forming flower buds and runner plants and storing energy. The Everbearing kind, they form flower buds when the daylight exceeds 12 hours, and they produce 2 crops, the first one in July and the second one in late summer. But neither crop is going to be as abundant as a June bearer, and they tend to be less hardy. And these are the varieties of June bearing that we carry. I'm never really sure how to say this one. I call it the honeyoy, but that might be wrong. But it's a pretty hardy to zone 3. It has consistent high yields of large, sweet red berries in July. It's a great choice if you want to harvest a lot of berries all at once so that you can make jam or freeze them. And then they aren't everbearing, but they make twice the amount of berries as the everbearing do. And the fruit tends to become pretty soft in hot weather. So you want to monitor that and maybe start picking them more often. And there's the Sitka hybrid, and it's probably the most common garden variety around here. It was developed in Sitka in 1905 by Charles Georgeson, and he's the one that the Georgeson Botanical Garden is named after. And it's a cross between some unknown garden variety and their really hardy native beach strawberry. And the seeds were sent to different areas of the state, and we're still growing them here. And they're very hardy even without mulching, so at least a zone 3. And they produce only small little berries, but they're very tasty, but you have to eat them when they're pink. They don't taste as good when they reach their full red color. And some everbearing varieties that we have. The Quinault, that's a zone 4, and they produce medium sweet berries, even on unrooted runners. So if you just have runners all over the place that haven't actually rooted into the soil yet, they can still produce berries on those runners. And so they're really good for containers or garden beds. And the preferred use for baskets, since they can form the berries on those unrooted runners. And the fruit's good, but it can be soft, so you have to harvest it really carefully. There's the Fort Laramie, and it's known as the hardiest everbearer. It's a zone 3. And it produces medium-sized, soft, they smell really nicely, very aromatic berries from July to frost. And they work really well in baskets and in containers, and they're great for freezing and preserving. And the Ozark Beauty is a really classic variety. It's a zone 4, and it produces medium-sized, wedge-shaped sweet berries from July to frost, and it produces a lot of them. And that picture is of the Ozark Beauty, so you can kind of see what I mean by wedge-shaped. And if there is a question that I can see, if you have gray mold one year, are you more susceptible to it the next year? Possibly. You want to make sure that you remove all of the dead plant material. And if you have the same conditions that could have caused gray mold, then yes, you might get it again next year. So remember to increase your air circulation and remove all of the spores as soon as you see them. Day neutral strawberries, they produce flower buds independent of daylight length, so they don't care how long the daylight is. And they produce a crop in July here in Alaska, and they keep going until frost, usually with 2 major crops and then smaller amounts of berries in between them. They're less sensitive to the difference between long and short days, so they bear most of the summer. And they're great if you're interested in a steady supply of strawberries than a lot at once. So if you don't really care about like making jam with all the strawberries that you get all at once, they're a totally fine variety to have. They're often planted in autumn and harvested the following spring. I still plant mine out in the spring and the beginning of the summer here, but some people do plant them in autumn. There's the Albion, which is hardy to a zone 4. Produces heavy yields of long conical shaped berries from July to frost. And that's a picture of them, so you can see what I mean by conical. They have really great flavor, and they're great for people who sell them in markets because they're large and they just keep on coming. The Seascape is hardy to zone 4, and they have large, nicely shaped, very delicious berries from July until frost. They're derived from and they perform similarly to the Albion. And they're a smaller plant that has shallower roots, and so it makes it really great in containers. Then there's Alpine strawberries, which are a different variety, and we carry some of the seeds here in the store, but to my knowledge, at least last year, we didn't carry any of the plants. They're small like the wild strawberries that are in the United States, but they're actually from Europe. And they don't spread from runners, so that makes them really great in decorative borders and in containers. And they just bear a small amount of fruit all season long. I think that their fruit is very delicious though. There's the Mignonette, and that's a zone 4, and you can grow that really easily from seed. It only gets about 6 to 8 inches tall, and the spread is about 12 inches. And again, they're really good in edging borders or containers. The Alexandria is a zone 4. It's pretty compact and it kind of makes like a little mound. And they're the most commonly available Alpine variety. If you find seeds, they're going to be the Alexandria kind. And they produce a really steady supply of very tasty berries. I grow them in my garden, and pretty much all summer from late June on, I have them, and they're pretty cold hardy too. And then there's the Yellow Wonder. It's a white Alpine cultivar. And that one's really easy to grow from seed too, and it's very sweet. I also grow those ones, and they have a really nice tropical pineapple-y flavor. The birds don't really bother them because they're white, I guess. So I don't ever have any trouble with the birds coming to steal them. And then there's the super fun white strawberries. The pine berries. They're a white strawberry with a pineapple-like flavor. They have red seeds. They're a hybrid from a South American strawberry, and then the Fragaria virginiana. And they were first found in South America around 2002. They are everbearing, and you would use the exact same growing techniques as regular strawberries. I heard asparagus paired well with strawberries. I have also heard that. I have not done it myself, but I have also heard that as well. So I would have to do more research to be able to tell you why, but that is something that I have read. Where to plant strawberries. So their growing site and soil. They like to be sunny, warm, and protected like all of us do. Just like raspberries, they need a lot of sunshine in order to produce lots of berries. You can grow strawberry plants in part sun or part shade, but they're going to do better for you and be happier if you grow them in full sun. Late spring frost can turn the centers of the blossoms black, which prevents berries from forming. So if you see that you have flowers growing and you know that there's going to be a cold snap, you can cover them up with some mulch or with some row cover. A gently south-facing slope is ideal. They need really good drainage or they can rot and be prone to disease. And most strawberry plants need a lot of space, and I'll talk about spacing in a minute. And the soil should be really fertile and rich with compost or organic matter like peat moss and well-rotted manure in it. And the ideal pH is similar to raspberries, 5.5 to 6.5. Before planting, you want to make sure you remove all weeds from the planting location. They do not like to compete with weeds at all. And just like the raspberries, don't plant where the potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers were the year before for the same reason, to lessen the spread of the verticillium wilt. So there's a couple of different designs here. You want to plant them in spring. So for me here, that would be in May, possibly early June if my ground isn't completely thawed. The timing doesn't matter as much. You want to do it as early as possible, but you want to make sure the ground is completely thawed and not soggy. You want to make sure the roots don't dry out during the planting process, so keep them damp and wrapped up. If you get them bare root from somebody, then make sure especially that you keep them damp. Dig a hole as deep as the roots of the plant that you're going to be transplanting, which is going to be about 6 to 8 inches deep. And don't bury the crown. So the crown is the part that comes up out of the soil. So you want to completely bury the roots, but don't bury the part where the stems start to come up. Water them very well and lay down mulch around them. And these are two pretty classic designs for how to space out strawberries. There's the matted row system, and that's on the left-hand side. The mother plants are widely spaced, about 18 to 24 inches apart, in rows that are 3 to 4 feet apart. And then you just let the daughter plants on runners fill in the gaps. So you don't trim the runners, you just let them go. And so it's going to make a matted row. And you want to lay down mulch while you're waiting for the runners to fill in the bare areas. And then there's the hilling system. And this is really good for varieties that don't send out too many runners, because you're going to be wanting to clip the runners. So you create kind of a mounded hill that's about 8 inches high and 24 inches wide. And then you plant them 12 to 15 inches apart. And then you want the rows separated by several feet. In this picture, they're separated by 4 feet. And clip any runners that come out. So you just want the mother plant, you don't want any daughter plants. And this causes a plant to put all of its energy into making berries. You get lots of really nice big berries, and you get pretty heavy yields. But the downside is that you're really taxing the plant to produce all those berries, and the plant gets tired and it might not produce as well the next year. So you might have to treat it more like an annual. Then growing them in raised beds in containers. Same soil requirements, make sure you have good drainage and rich soil. So make sure your containers have drainage holes in them. You want to aim for a bed that's at least 8 inches deep and 3 feet wide. And then space June bearers, which have lots of runners, 12 to 18 inches apart. And then everybody else can be spaced about 8 to 12 inches apart. And that was just a really neat design that I found. For a raised strawberry bed that has a cage on top that you can lift up to help keep out any unwanted pests. There are a lot of different kinds of containers you can grow strawberries in, but you want to make sure that you have good drainage. They really don't like to sit in the damp. And if you use one of those strawberry pots, which I should have included a picture of, but it's like a tall pot that has little pocket pots on the side. If you use a ceramic glazed one, then it's not going to dry out as fast as a terracotta one. And you might not get as much fruit on strawberries in pots because they grow better if you put them in a more traditional setting in the ground, but you'll still get berries. And you don't want to let them dry out. Mulching, watering, and fertilizing. They really like mulch. They like it because it helps keep the soil moist and it keeps weeds away, but you don't want to cover up the crown of the plant. So it's kind of like the middle part of the plant. Straw is a really great option. You can use hay, but it tends to have a lot of seeds in it. So I always recommend using straw if you can. Make sure you water them at least 1 inch per week. And like raspberries, using a soaker hose makes that really easy. You also don't want to spray them down from the top down. Try to get the water mostly in the soil. They do have really shallow root systems, and so they can dry out very quickly. If you have soil rich in organic matter, like if you use a lot of compost, then you don't need to fertilize as much. But if you do want to, do it in the spring and in the late summer, but don't do it in the fall for the same reasons that you don't fertilize most things in the fall. You don't want it to start putting out a whole bunch of new growth right before it's going to get cold. And then liquid seaweed or fish emulsion are really great for fertilizing them. Some companion plants. They like to grow with spinach, beans, chives, lettuce, onions, peas, and radishes, and maybe asparagus too. I would have to look more into that, but I have heard that. They really like borage and thyme, and that's a picture of borage on the right there. But don't plant them with kale. Kale really hates strawberries. Don't plant them with raspberries, and then the potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, or eggplants. Some pests and diseases. The gray mold is another one that you can encounter with them, but the same rules apply. Remove any molded fruits or flowers right away. Pick the fruits every few days, and don't grow your plants too close together. And I don't actually know how to say that. I have a reader's vocabulary. So that fungal pathogen right there, warm, humid weather really encourages it. And you'll know that you have it when you have dark spots on your leaves, and then your flowers are dead and dying. And then you have really dark kind of mushy spots on your fruit. And you're just going to have to remove and destroy the plants. And then slugs and snails, you can use the classic deer traps, copper barriers, diatomaceous earth, or sluggo. And birds, netting works really well. I've also heard that people use painted rocks to trick the birds. They peck at the rocks and they decide that they don't want to try to eat those anymore, and so they leave your strawberries alone. I have not actually tried it. Looks like a cute idea though. Strawberries bruise really easily, so be careful when you're harvesting them. Harvest them often, and then try to collect the fruit again on a cool morning after the dew has dried. You don't want the plants to be wet when you collect them, but do your best. It's not a perfect world. You want to leave the stem on the plant, at least a little bit of it. So snap it or snip it with clean tools just above the berry, and don't completely remove the stem from the berry. Put them in a single layer if possible, and then eat, freeze, or process them within a few days of harvesting. Refrigerating can lessen the flavor, so they're not as, they don't taste as good, but if you leave them out in a warm room, then they're going to spoil faster. So you have to decide what you want to do. And don't wash them until you're going to eat them or freeze them or process them. Overwintering strawberries. They do not like to freeze, thaw, and refreeze. So in the ground and in beds. After a killing frost, you want to remove the dead leaves and the stems and any fallen fruit to help prevent disease, but don't cut them too short. About 1.25 inches is a good size. So you want a little bit of stem there. Any shorter and you might cut into the crown, and we don't want to hurt the crown. And a lot of strawberry plants, because they just keep putting out more and more leaves and runners, the crown kind of rises up out of the ground. And if it does that, you want to hill more soil around the plant, but don't put it on top of the crown. So just kind of create a little hill around it. And then thickly cover the whole plant with a weed-free mulch like straw. If you have them in containers, You want to do the same thing, remove the dead leaves, the stems, and any fallen fruit. You want the plant to be as cleaned up as possible. I have heard and seen people bury their strawberries that are in containers. So they just take the whole container and they dig a hole that's the same size as the container, and then they put the container in it. And then make sure that the hole lets you cover up the entire container all the way up to the rim, and then mulch over the top of it. I know Tim Pritchett has done that. He's the one who gives us our strawberries here, and he's had success with it. So that's one way you can do it. You can put containers in a garage or a shed. If it's very cold or if it's an unheated shed, try to have them close to an inner wall. So if your shed's up against your house, try to have it on the wall that's up against your house. And if you need to, cover them up with mulch. And then you want to put your strawberry containers in a sheltered area alongside your house if you don't have any other options, and then mulch them very heavily. And try to make sure that if you have them up against your house, there's not going to be a lot of melt or runoff that's going into them. And in the winter, if you are leaving them in the ground or in beds, you don't need to worry about this. But if you have them indoors or in a sheltered area, you do want to make sure that you moisten them. And so you can put some snow on the pot once a week, or you can give them like half a cup to a cup of water, depending on the size of your pot, about once a month, just to make sure that everything stays slightly damp, but is not soggy. And these are some resources. I really like the book Homegrown Berries. She does go over some berries that we don't generally grow in Alaska, but it's still a really great resource. And then my go-to whenever I'm trying to learn anything new about gardening is the Garden Primer by Barbara Damrosch, and she's got a really great section on strawberries and another one on raspberries. Some resources, you can always email me here. The UAF Cooperative Extension, of course, is excellent. They have a lot of information on berries specifically, and then you can also contact them if you have some sort of disease going on with your plants and you don't know what it is. You can describe it to them, you can send them pictures. They will be able to help you out. There's a Facebook group called Tim's Plants, Produce, and Worms, and that's run by Tim Pritchett. He's our main strawberry, raspberry, and worm supplier. He's a really great resource. It's a public group, so you don't actually have to join the group in order to like comment or read anything on it. He has files on how to grow raspberries and strawberries, and just a really great, nice guy, and he'll be able to answer questions for you. And then we also have the Alaska Pioneer Fruit Growers Association, and they have a lot of newsletters that go pretty far back, and you can get great information from them. And now I am going to answer some questions, and bear with me, I don't have my assistant here who is better at scrolling through these things. Oh, and there's a lot of questions. Okay, we did moose and the random black spots. I don't have experience with Kiska raspberries or Toklet strawberries, so I don't know anything about them, unfortunately. Let's see. And then a link to the recording will be emailed out to participants. And as far as I know, we don't sell the Kiska raspberries or the Toklet strawberries. I don't know where a good source is to get those. Yep, we covered how to do strawberries in containers. And should you thin plants in older raised beds? Absolutely. Feel free to always thin out your plants if they aren't producing anymore, or if they're just too close together. You will find in the spring that you can go onto like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, and people are just pretty much giving away strawberries that they're having to thin out. They reproduce quite rampantly, so thin them out as much as you need to. Is it important to remove the winter straw at the start of spring? Yes, it is. So I like to remove the winter straw because it's usually pretty damp. I don't want to start any fungal diseases brewing. So I like to remove all my winter mulch and then put down new mulch at the start of spring. Let's see, my recommendation for a variety that has good overwinter survival spreads by runners. And oh boy, I think it said would do well in a bed. So we can go back and take a look at the different varieties. So the day neutral ones aren't as great with the runners. So any of them would really do pretty well. Like all the varieties that we sell here are going to do well in your garden, as long as you're at least a zone 4 or zone 3. So if you're any lower than that, you would need to take precautions. But I really like the Fort Laramie. That one I think is really good. I just like how it tastes. Why can't raspberries and strawberries grow together? They technically can, but they spread diseases back and forth. So that's why you want to prevent them from growing together. Do you put the removed winter straw in the compost? I don't, just because I'm worried that it might have some diseases on it. I know other people do, so I would do your own research and decide what you want to do there. I just never want to spread any diseases, and I tend not to be able to get my compost pile too hot, and so I worry that I won't be able to get rid of anything bad in there. Is it too late to soil test in spring? We moved into a new place with an established raspberry garden, but it was too late to soil test. The ideal time to soil test is the summer or fall before you're going to put in a new bed. That way you can put any recommended amendments and let them sit over the winter if they need to. But still, I would still go ahead and do a soil test in the spring if you didn't have a chance to do it in the winter or in the autumn, because that way you have an idea of what you're dealing with. If I was doing it in the spring, I might just use one of the kits like we sell in the store here and not do one of the laboratory tests. I would maybe save that for the fall when I knew that I was going to be able to put in all the amendments they recommend. Let's see, I thought you were supposed to remove 2-year-old plants as they don't produce well. It depends on what method you're using, and if your plants stop producing as well, then yes, you should go ahead and remove them. I have a rough strawberry bed that's on an old slope. Is it worth it to clear everything around them and make a real bed? I think anything is worth a try. Yeah, I would test your soil and make sure that the slope isn't too steep so that it's not going to have too much erosion, so that when you make a bed, everything stays in one spot. Best way to control spittle bugs. They do love strawberries. The best way I have found to control them is to spray them really sharply with a hose. So put the hose on full blast and spray them down. And I do that when it's in the morning, if I can, so that the strawberries can dry out throughout the day. What is the white foam that appears late in summer? That is probably the spittle bugs. There we go. Do you cut back your strawberries every fall? I do cut back my strawberries every fall, and I have not had any problems with them coming back. Again, if you aren't sure or if that makes you nervous, then experiment. I would cut some back and then don't cut some of the others back and see what happens. Yes, the link will be recorded. Let's see. It just took me all the way back up to the top. Okay. You're welcome for the information. Are there any other questions? I know I went through that pretty fast. I usually have somebody reading the questions to me while I'm doing this. How do you cut them back with a lawnmower? Yes, you can cut them back with a lawnmower if your not in a raised bed, you can do that. I just use really sharp snips that are clean, and I go through and cut them back that way. If you do cut them back with a lawnmower, make sure that you have, you're at like about 1.5 inches, I guess, raised up, because you don't want to cut them all the way down and you don't want to damage the crown. So if you are really good at being precise with your lawnmower, then you can use one. But if you aren't, then I would just do it by hand, even though it takes longer. Anybody else have any questions? And you're always welcome to email me. Like I tell you every time, I don't have a desk job, so sometimes it can take me a couple of days to actually get the chance to check my email, but I am always happy to respond to you. And if you come into the store, you can ask for me and they will come and find me. And then we do have other people here as well who know a lot about plants. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up then. And if you think of anything, then please let me know. And there should be a link going out to for the YouTube link probably early next week. Usually they try to get them out Monday. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great weekend.